I want to tell you a story. It starts in March 2020. Do you remember those early days of the pandemic? Days that simultaneously felt like yesterday and 100 years ago, when we were sent home to quarantine for 2 weeks that stretched into another 2 weeks, weeks stretched into months, months stretched into endless days. We were afraid to touch our mail. We queued up to buy groceries and disinfected our packages when we brought them home. We learned how to judge 6-foot distances. We learned how to unmute ourselves on Zoom, mostly. We made jokes about wearing soft and hard pants. We baked bread if we could get our hands on yeast, hoarded toilet paper, worked on jigsaw puzzles, went to virtual happy hours and trivia nights. We made face masks out of whatever we could find. We banged our pots outside our windows every evening. We witnessed a viral video of George Floyd being murdered by mechanical pots. We showed up to Black Lives Matter protests. We voted in a presidential election. We watched with fear and disbelief when rioters stormed the US Capitol. That's the backdrop of the story that I want to tell today. Story about storytelling, about the need for community and connection in times of crisis and urgency, the need to create spaces of possibility and hope, of finding our authentic voices in a cacophony of noise, misinformation, disinformation, and hate, and how we can use what we learned then in this current moment of crisis. I want to use podcasting as a lens for thinking about storytelling in times of crisis. I know what you're probably thinking. Do we really need another podcast? I ask myself this every day. We're swimming in a sea of endless episodes, celebrity podcasts, sports podcasts, AI-generated podcasts. Everyone has a podcast these days, to the point where it's become a plot device in Hollywood, if not a wholesale cultural cliche. But if you sift through the noise and move past the content, we can still find authentic voices telling authentic stories. And those are the stories I want to focus on today. Stories born out of care and kindness and generosity, stories born out of emergent strategy. And as I hope to demonstrate today, it's those kinds of stories, shaped by shared values and strategies of transformation, that can help us find our way through our current crisis. A story about my own journey into podcasting. I came to San Diego State University in the fall of 2016 as the first Humanities Librarian.
No, thank you. I'm not interested. Take care. Bye-bye.
Didn't know how to unmute themselves. We good? Okay. I was hired as part of an interdisciplinary research cluster focused on digital humanities and global diversity. I was hired to create the DH Center, which was to be the physical hub and home of our cross-campus DH initiative. SDSU is a large public institution occupying the unceded lands of the Kumeyaay people, situated near the US-Mexico border and on the Pacific Rim. We are one of 22 campuses in the California State University system, the largest public university system in the country, with a mission to educate California's diverse population. As both a Hispanic serving and Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institution, SDSU has a deep commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. While we recently achieved an R1 designation, we maintain a strong commitment to our teaching origins and the teacher-scholar model. SDSU's Digital Humanities Initiative, which we call DH at SDSU, began within this institutional context as a grassroots faculty-led community that sought to bring people together from across a range of disciplines to explore emerging technologies in the classroom and engage in critical digital inquiry. We take a capacious view of DH, defining it for our purposes as efforts to study digital technologies and culture, employ computational practices in research and teaching, and reflect upon the impact of the digital. We are a values-centered and feminist-infused collective with a commitment to anti-racist social justice. We value care over code, process over product, people over technology. Okay. As I've described elsewhere, most recently in my book chapter, Centering Our Values, the DH Center is a user-centered and values-inflected space that was iteratively designed with our faculty, staff, and students. Through a series of community ideation workshops, first in fall 2016 and then again in fall 2018, We designed a space that was less about any one specific technology, project, or methodology. Rather, we created a space to bring people out of their disciplinary silos, to experiment with, reflect on, and at times reject emerging technologies. But more than anything, we created the DH Center as a space for critical conversations, a meeting place for our community that embodied our collective values. Just as the DH Center was designed to be responsive and reconfigurable, our shared DH values were approached as a living, evolving articulation of our praxis, one that served us especially well in the early days of the pandemic. English professor and DH Initiative co-founder and co-director Jessica Pressman and I turned to our values to help us meet the crisis we faced. Starting from a place of care, we focused on what our community needed most in that moment. We resisted the impulse to do more with less. Instead, our guiding mantra became work less, care more. I've carried the mantra of work less, care more with me in the years since we returned to campus. I've clung to it as a way to push back against the demands of the neoliberal university. No matter what we faced in those days, we remained true to our commitment to putting people over technology. Our people were our infrastructure. Their interest, curiosity, and passion defined our collective work, including our turn to podcasting. Back when I arrived at SDSU, there was only a little bit of interest in podcasting. A few faculty were dabbling in pedagogy, while others were experimenting with it as a form of scholarly communication. I was an avid listener, but I knew virtually nothing about how to work with audio, much less create a podcast. Like so many digital humanists, I'm largely self-taught, relying on YouTube videos to learn just enough audio editing to help the odd class. During our second round of user-driven space design in 2018, we began exploring podcasting infrastructure. DH at SDSU co-founder Joanna Brooks, who's also a professor of English and the Associate Vice President of Faculty Advancement, had started experimenting with podcasting and proposed that we create a low-tech portable studio. That first studio cost about $300. It featured a single Blue Yeti USB microphone with cheap headphones, a tabletop phone shield for minimal sound dampening, and a bulletin board to share resources. When we opened that studio in spring 2019, there was only a little bit of interest in this space. Random faculty member looking for a place to do an NPR interview, that sort of thing. In the last few years, we've seen an explosion of interest in podcasting at SDSU. More and more faculty are experimenting with it in their classes and research. Student organizations are developing shows to extend their reach, and so many students come through our space to create a pod assignment. Many of our students have such a good time recording for class that they come back for fun. And because we're the only recording studio designed for all of campus, not just students and not just faculty, lots of staff are starting to come through, whether to record shows tied to the work of their offices or for fun. In just a few years, our one little studio grew into 4 professional grade studios and a 5th low-tech studio for quick assignments. We've partnered with faculty across the disciplines to explore incorporating podcasting into their pedagogy. We offer class instruction, asynchronous learning resources, workshops and trainings, and consultations to help people throughout the entire podcast lifecycle. We've launched a publishing platform to host shows for our campus partners and developed a workflow for depositing episodes into our institutional repository. Every piece of technology, indeed every intervention we develop, is in response to community need. We constantly assess what people are trying to do, look to see where they get stuck, and figure out how we can ease pain points. That growth wasn't possible without the podcasting institutes we developed in partnership with the National Humanities Center in Durham, North Carolina, which ran for 5 years. But as I want to argue here today, those institutes were not just opportunities for humanists and humanistic social scientists to learn to tell compelling stories for the public, which of course they were. They were transformative experiences that reimagined how the academy could function and how we could be caring humanists in times of crisis and urgency. Podcasting proved to be a particularly well-suited medium to the change we were trying to enact. Podcasts embody a DIY ethos. All you really need is a mic and an idea. As Laurie Beckstead, Ian Cook, and Hannah McGregor argue in Podcast or Perish, Peer Review and Knowledge Creation for the 21st Century, podcasting is a uniquely intimate medium, sonic conversations among people in conversation with their micropublics. As McGregor argues elsewhere, the experience of listening to a podcast, typically through headphones while doing something else, is deeply personal. Sound enters our bodies. We form personal connections to the voices feeding through. Podcasts become Podcasts became particularly meaningful during the pandemic when physical isolation pushed people to seek online connection and community. In the summer of 2018, Joanna Brooks reached out to me asking if I was interested in helping her pilot a podcasting institute in our DH Center. She envisioned a week-long institute focused on training doctoral students to collaboratively develop public-facing, research-based humanities content using digital media formats. She had cold called the National Humanities Center with her pitch, hoping to make SDSU something of a West Coast hub for the NHC. Serendipitously, she reached Andy Nape, who was then Vice President of Education Programs. He and I had collaborated on a DH project at UNC Chapel Hill several years prior. He was enthusiastic to give Joanna's idea a try. So we spent a year planning a pilot in-person podcasting institute, which we held in our DH Center July 8th through 12th, 2019. Even though I didn't know much about the technical aspects of podcasting, I could draw on my vast experience in project management and DH pedagogy. I knew how to find experts like Hannah McGregor, a leader in scholarly podcasting, pull them in and learn from them alongside our students. From the start, I relied on the expertise of my colleague, Patrick Flanagan. At the time, he was a cataloger by day and a musician by night. We made arrangements for him to be on site during the institute, teach the basics of recording and editing audio, and help with troubleshooting. Years later, he would transfer to working full-time in our DH Center as the programs and operations specialist. And it's been under his leadership that we've been able to scale up our infrastructure and support for podcasting. That July, we welcomed 13 doctoral students from UC San Diego, UC Irvine, University of Southern California, the University of Arizona, and ASU. They spent the week in residence together, eating meals on campus, enjoying dinners at some of our favorite spots around the city. I divided our participants into 4 cross-institutional and interdisciplinary learning cohorts with a range of technical experience and expertise. At the start of the week, the cohorts were practically strangers, with only a dinner the night before as their sole interaction. By Friday morning, each group had created a 20 to 30-minute podcast and accompanying website for the concluding listening party and reflection session. We brought in local speakers to talk about digital humanities, web content production, scholarly podcasting, and podcast perspectives from our local NPR affiliate. We shared humanities moments, stories of encounters, discoveries, and reflections about the power of the humanities. We spent time teaching students about methods of collaboration and helping them explore public-facing scholarship. We became a family that week. And like a family, we had our share of bumps and conflicts. One group splintered into 2 mini groups when they couldn't work out interpersonal and creative differences. But by the end of the week, every student had helped create a podcast. We celebrated together at our listening party. Students couldn't quite believe that they had produced compelling stories so quickly. We didn't just celebrate their end products. We celebrated the journey they'd taken together, learning to engage with each other through care, respect, and generosity. And in the process, they learned to find a new kind of voice, one that used their scholarly expertise in service to public stories and communities. Our week together was magical and revealing. Joanna, Andy, and I heard a lot of fear in our students' voices. Some had never stepped outside of the perceived boundaries of traditional disciplinary scholarship. Some were deeply curious about publicly engaged scholarship, but weren't sure they would be supported in that journey. Even though their departments funded them to attend our institute, many participants admitted that they didn't want their doctoral advisors to know they were there. They had learned to be afraid. Joanna and I quickly realized that our institute wasn't just an opportunity to teach public-facing digital storytelling. It was an opportunity to make an intervention in the academy, to propose an approach to the humanities that was deeply collaborative and caring and rooted in a sense of responsibility to the human experience of diverse American publics. In short, it was an opportunity to even more intentionally apply our DH praxis to create the conditions for transformation. After assessing our pilot, we began planning our 2020 Institute, scheduled to be held in mid-June. With our refined focus, we felt ready to scale up to host 25 students. We began making arrangements for Barry Lamb, who was a professor at Vassar College and the creator of Hi-Fi Nation, to give our opening plenary and share his experience as a leading scholarly podcaster. We invited Hannah McGregor back to talk about peer review for podcasting, her work to launch an academic podcasting network, and how podcasting could transform the logics of scholarly communication. Then we were sent home to isolate from each other in mid-March of 2020, first for 2 weeks, which stretched into 2 more weeks, and pretty soon SDSU was planning to stay fully remote for the fall and eventually for the following spring. Amidst the chaos, the uncertainty, and the fear of those early pandemic days, we weighed whether to cancel the Podcasting Institute. With some trepidation, we decided to pivot to virtual, and I spent the rest of the spring testing different ways of running tool workshops, reading circles, and social events over Zoom. With the help of a recent graduate and temporary staff member, Kathy Tanks, I played around with different approaches until I was confident I could facilitate a week-long virtual institute. I knew I couldn't do it alone and arranged for both Cassie and my colleague Patrick to help me. Joanna suggested we add Lach to the mix to support cohort bonding, asynchronous communication, resource sharing, and tech support to compensate for not being in the same room, much less the same time zone for our journey together. 3 weeks after George Floyd was murdered and BLM protests exploded all over the country, I opened up the Zoom at 8 a.m. on a Monday and launched our first virtual podcast institute. Our 25 participants were scattered across the country and beyond. One of our participants had gotten stuck overseas while on a research trip and couldn't make it back to the US. She joined the Zooms in the middle of the night. Another participant Zoomed from an empty apartment as she prepared to move to take a postdoc. I was also preparing to move at that time and struggled to carve out the time to pack while leading the Institute, but I made sure to save the bookshelf that served as my Zoom backdrop until the Institute was over. We made it work through careful scaffolding, guided conversations, and stepwise technical instruction. I created a tech channel in Slack to post tech tips, screenshots, and offer asynchronous troubleshooting. I remember spending long days at my dining table on Zoom and sometimes sitting in 2 Zooms on 2 computers. With the added complication of being distanced from each other, I expanded the community agreements I had developed back in 2019, adding provisions for virtual collaboration. These agreements acknowledged that connecting and collaborating virtually is challenging between Zoom fatigue and the distractions of email and life. We agreed to take care of ourselves and each other, take as many breaks from our computers as we needed, and rest when we could. We agreed to engage with care and compassion in our virtual spaces while respecting each other's privacy. We didn't ask participants to fully immerse themselves in the Institute, to shut out the world and pretend it didn't exist as we had in 2019. Rather, we asked them to lean into the moment, to use the tools and frameworks we were sharing as a way to make sense of the world and to bring their individual and collective experiences and expertise to bear. In short, we encouraged them to use this moment to fuel and inspire their stories. Emergent strategy served as the theoretical framing for our Institute, a way to create a set of shared values. Joanna asked Andy and the NHC to send each participant a copy in advance, along with the Blue Yeti microphone that would be theirs to keep. We invited students to explore the book before our week together. We combined Brown's approach with my DH praxis to create the conditions for the kind of community we wanted to build, a way to set intentions and encourage participants to engage with each other with care, kindness, and generosity, as a way of imagining different possibilities for the humanities in what Joanna calls emergent humanities. Emergent strategy spoke to me. It aligns seamlessly with my own approach to DH that I was refining during those early pandemic days. Small is good, small is all. The large is a reflection of the small. Change is constant, be like water. There is always enough time for the right work. There is a conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can have. Find it. Never a failure, always a lesson. Trust the people. If you trust the people, they become trustworthy. Move at the speed of trust. Focus on critical connections more than critical mass. Build the resilience by building the relationships. Less prep, more presence. What you pay attention to grows. In 2020, this felt like a radical stance, a way to push back against business as usual and clamors for a return to normalcy, when we just knew that things would never be the same. Back then, my university administration assured us we would slow things down, hit pause on non-essential work, but the work kept coming. Similar to their assurances that we will do less with less in our current time of austerity. Emergent strategy gave me permission to hit pause, to say no, to not ask more of others or myself, to work less and care more. I took care to embody my emergent DH approach, to model these values as a way to encourage others to embrace and embody them. I emphasized kindness, rest, and letting go of perfection. I encouraged participants to capture the imperfections of their recording environments, to let their podcasts be products of the unique moment we were in rather than strive for perfect sound engineering. I urged the students to be real, to let us hear them breathe and stumble and say and like, to be unapologetically human in a moment of deep uncertainty, and to capture that uncertainty in their pods. We asked our 25 participants to engage in emergent strategy throughout the week, to build deep trust, to go slow, to scale down. As I had done in the Pilot Institute, I engineered learning cohorts of 3 to 4 participants that mixed institutions, disciplines, research topics, and experience levels. The intention was to push students to speak outside of their scholarly silos, to reject jargon in order to tell compelling stories that transcended any particular discipline or methodology. We wanted them to learn to trust their expertise, their colleagues' expertise, and to draw on their scholarly and personal networks to extend their understanding of the world. We carved out time for students to talk to each other before we introduced any technology. We wanted them to find the conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can have. We urged them to focus on the critical connections that drove their work and passion, to look for patterns in those connections. We asked them to create podcasts rooted in emergent strategy that addressed our particular moment of crisis. But we also asked them to focus on the process as much as the product. We wanted them to take time to get to know each other and build a trusting relationship before they started working on their episodes. Here's Lauren Burrell-Cox, June Key, Myrna Wassef, and Kevin Warren, known to us as Cohort 6. They decided to record their initial conversations and used that as the introduction to their podcast.
Mic check, 1, 2, 3. Imagine a world where the global pandemic has made face-to-face interactions with strangers all but impossible, where anti-Black racism has gotten so lethal that protesters are driven onto the streets in every major city, week after week, where global warming threatens to submerge entire nations and bring the world to the edge of climate catastrophe, where the gap between the rich and poor continues to widen as social safety nets are being ripped apart. This is 2020, a time when upheaval has become ordinary. But let's leave the world behind for a moment and zoom onto the computer screens of 4 ordinary graduate students making their very first podcast.
Talk to each other, share your stories about where you come from, your education, your work, what matters to you, and how the last 5 months have impacted you.
This was the first day of the Podcasting Institute. We didn't know one another yet, and we met for the first time Zooming in from San Diego, Gainesville, Charlottesville, and Irvine.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I go to the University of Florida. I'm a PhD student studying film, and I study documentary and experimental film. And what are the other ones? I also work at the Center for the Humanities and the Public Sphere as the program coordinator. And how have the last 5 months impacted me? Well, a lot has been going on a personal as well as a global level. I would say I've learned how to be alone a little bit more than I used to, but I've also been looking a lot for connections and lots of Zooming, as we're doing now.
I can go next.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I'm Kevin. I go to the University of Virginia, grad student there, getting my PhD in ancient history, so it's like Greeks and Romans. I work mainly on political economy of the Roman Empire, but I'm also interested in like Greek religion and colonization. Oh, what matters to you? I guess I kind of want like those things that I study to sort of like make them relevant to today. I mean, there's like such a big gap between then and now, but I find it very interesting and important.
Hi, I'm June. So I am from Wuhan, China, the center, or what was the center of the current coronavirus outbreak. I go to school at UC Irvine, and I'm getting a PhD in comparative literature, but specifically my work focuses on independent Chinese film and representations of trauma. what matters to me is kind of this is a hard question.
Hi everyone, I'm Marina. I'm here in San Diego. It would have been great if we like all got to see each other here, but I go to UCSD. I'm a history PhD in Middle East Studies. I was born in Egypt actually, and I was raised here in San Diego, but like I go back and forth, and I spend my summers in Egypt, and like all my family's still there. And what matters to me is, so I'm Coptic, and the stories that I'm telling are really personal to my community also. And I feel like my work is not just like work, but it's also something that's personal to me, and trying to use like history and storytelling to really like uplift the stories of people who are not like their stories are not written down.
After our introductions, we started throwing ideas around. We realized that all of the stories we told seemed to converge on shifting intimacies and how the ways that humans connect have changed. Here we are on day 3, reflecting on our Zoom introductions from day 1.
I wonder if we could also like think about how we introduced ourselves to each other. I'm just think as we're reflecting on it right now, like how did we make our Zoom entrance, I guess,
Yeah.
to each other?
Yeah, because it was kind of that like I feel like the sort of like formal thing of like, who are you?
Yeah.
What do you study? Where are you from? And all that. And then when we got to the point of, it's like, what was it? What's most important to you?
Mm-hmm.
We're all like, what?
More than anything, we asked students to let go of their fear and begin to trust us and themselves that they could do this. The rapid pace and virtual environment was the ideal breeding ground for our spirit of experimentation. It forced students to let go of perfection for the sake of finishing the episode. Zoom fatigue pushed them to carve out time to rest and tend to life. And I thought to infuse joy throughout the week, posting funny GIFs in the Slack, sharing fur baby pics and memes, forging a virtual community that, while not a replacement for the family we created in the Face-to-Face Institute the year prior, helped fill the void of loneliness in those early pandemic days. We laughed and cried together. I remember the concluding listening party overwhelming me to the point of having to turn off my camera at multiple points because I was crying so hard. Listen to this same cohort who crafted individual stories about what shifting intimacies meant to them. Here's an excerpt of Myrna's story.
There's an abnormal new normal in our world today. As the world goes through this pandemic, and as we're all feeling this pressure of feeling in isolation, we're all still seeking out this feeling of connection. And what's really interesting is at the same time, globally, we're all dealing with the same issue. How do we experience what it means to be fully human amidst this struggle? It's almost like we're living in a social experiment where we're being asked to demonstrate what sci-fi stories have been telling us for years. What happens when the whole world is forced to disconnect in public and only connect virtually? And now we're really experiencing connection behind this mask of technology, whether it's through Zoom, whether it's through phone calls. What's really striking is how public spaces have become private, more exclusive, and how private spaces, our homes, which were places of retreat, where we would go to after a long day at work, or a place to go wind down from, these are now the spaces that have become our work, our public space. We now sit in our bedrooms, our kitchens, living rooms, places that were once off limits to the public. These now become our offices and professional workplaces. Our private homes are now public. It's become really common to be in a Zoom meeting and to have a family member of the person you're talking to just pop into the screen, or a child screaming in the background. And the informality of this, of being able to hear into the private lives of people we're talking to in these professional settings has really exposed the blurred lines of what private and public now mean in the age of coronavirus. In what other context could we even imagine being introduced to people for the first time in a professional context, and at the same time being introduced to their partners, their pets, their bedrooms, their kitchens, their living space, and having that all accessible just through our public technology? What's become clear through the different ways we're experiencing this pandemic is that we're all searching for humanity around us. We're searching for this connection, this intimacy with each other, where we're assured that we're not just disease carriers walking around. We're not just biological weapons of human destruction, because we have the potential to be more than just bodies carrying and transmitting disease. We're still human, even though we're dealing with isolation.
It wasn't simply that these were incredibly moving, beautiful, and in some cases emotionally raw podcasts that struggled to make sense of isolation, intimacy, systemic racism, and other pressing issues of that summer. They all were. What moved me to tears in the listening party was hearing what a group of strangers turned collaborators turned friends could do together. The way they were willing to take risks and experiment, the way they let go of their fear of failure, the way they refused to engage in hypercritique, choosing instead to celebrate their accomplishments, no matter how their podcast turned out. The love they showed each other, the support and cheering they offered other cohorts during the listening party, the way that Lauren and June remained close friends after the Institute, launching a podcast together, staying in touch even though June moved halfway across the world. In 2022, Lauren traveled to Irvine to attend June's PhD graduation. That was the first time they met. This past summer, June flew out for Lauren's wedding. The stories of how these students engaged with each other was what moved me to tears. It confirmed for me that our value-centered DH approach and reliance on emergent strategy was what we needed in that moment. On the heels of our first successful virtual institute, Andy suggested we offer a winter one. The intersession timing seemed ideal for graduate students, and it would free up the summer to pilot a faculty institute, which we'd wanted to do for some time. We began planning a mid-December 2020 institute with 50 participants. By the end of fall, there was more interest than we could accommodate, so we added a second week in January to increase our enrollment. We were surprised at the level of interest. 95 students in total, split over 2 weeks in December 2020 and January 2021. It was a daunting task to try to teach so many people in a single Zoom. To help me, I activated my network of support, pulling in former participants, students, and colleagues to serve as a formal tech team. Together, we taught the tools, helped troubleshoot tech issues, provided asynchronous support in Slack, and cheered everyone on. Each cohort had a member of the tech team embedded in their group to assist them. I want to pause and reflect for a moment about what was going on at this time. Most of us were still living quarantine life, working remotely. Others were pushed to return to campus even before the COVID vaccine became widely available. The 2020 US presidential election was held on November 3rd, and Biden was declared the winner. On January 6, 2021, there was an attempted coup to prevent the formal certification of the election results. I was at home that day, as I've been every other day that fall and winter. I was chatting with a colleague on Zoom when she suddenly told me to turn on the news. I watched, stunned, unable to make sense of what I was seeing, in ways that echoed the chaos of 9/11 for me. I remember sitting on my couch watching the storming of the Capitol, then watching congressional speeches late into the night. 5 days later, I opened up a Zoom at 8 a.m. and launched the second week of our Winter Institute. Entering the Zoom that Monday morning, we were in desperate need of community. The insurrection was still so raw. And while it hadn't succeeded, Biden wouldn't be sworn into office for another week or so. Things still felt so uncertain and scary. How could we pretend that wasn't happening? How could I ask these participants to act like everything was fine just so they could learn how to make a podcast episode? I was honest and vulnerable with them that first day. I couldn't ask them to leave the world behind. Instead, I asked them to lean into the moment, to use their training as humanists combined with our DH values and emergent strategy to help make sense of this particular moment. So many of the groups answered this call, They kept it real, they were vulnerable, they were willing to take risks and experiment, to let go of their fear of failure, and with it, the drive for perfection. They let go of the idea that they had to have a particular scholarly and academic voice, and instead use their personal experiences, expertise, and their training to tell these incredibly human-centered stories about this moment, about COVID, Black Lives Matter, and the insurrection, about what it meant to be in isolation and to experience deep loss. But they also laughed and were playful and insisted on joy as a form of survival, resistance, and recovery. Their podcasts were so moving because they were real and they were authentic and they were beautiful. Here's Catherine Churchill, Bridget Dale, Maxwell Pinjon, and Sarah Ward grappling with the events of the prior week.
Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are.
So, when Biden said that that's not who we are, it struck a lot of experts as not really true. I'm joined by a group of my peers in graduate school. Each of us are experts in our own fields, and we all noticed some issues with the conclusions drawn out by Joe Biden. Catherine Churchill, our medieval literature scholar, joins us now to talk about her perspective.
In my Old English class last fall at the University of Virginia, one of my classmates, we'll call him D, was quiet and a little strange. In medieval studies, my field as a PhD student, that's not so unusual. Anyway, together D and I learned about the meter and literary devices of Old English poetry. But 8 months later, as BLM protests gained traction this past summer, D sent an email to the entire grad student listserv. He called BLM protesters, including many of his fellow graduate students, loud-mouthed, irresponsible, delusional idiots, and linked to white supremacist, misogynistic articles on the internet. Many of us were horrified and angry. Even after he was sanctioned by the college, I felt icky, like I'd found something rotten in the back of my fridge. Who had I been studying with this whole time? Naively admiring poems with? Dee's email reminds me, in a way, of Jake Angeli, aka Jake Chansey, aka the QAnon shaman, who stormed the Capitol with other pro-Trump rioters this week. They're different, of course. Dee is quiet, whereas Angeli talks almost compulsively. Dee seemed to be more generically alt-right, whereas Angeli is an advocate for QAnon, a conspiracy theory that people in power are part of a cannibalistic pedophilia ring. Here's what Angeli sounds like.
And so, as a shaman, I am like a multidimensional or hyperdimensional being, okay? I am able to perceive multiple different frequencies of light beyond my 5 senses, and it allows me to see into these other higher dimensions.
Okay, that's a lot. The thing is, Angeli's outfit is nearly as astonishing as what he has to say. He always appears at public demonstrations in the same getup, shirtless with lots of tattoos showing, in loose brown pants. He puts red, white, and blue paint on his face, and he wears a hat made of coyote fur and topped with buffalo horns. Here's how he explains it.
The horns are, hey man, you mess with the buffalo, you get the horns, bro. And if you ever tried messing with the buffalo, that doesn't work out too well for many people. This right here, this is coyote skin. According to the Navajo, the coyote is like the trickster, almost like a malevolent force. So I'm wearing the skin of the trickster. I got 2 tails here, okay? So the trickster messed with the bull, got the horns, okay? And the face paint is representative of the Native American tradition of like donning on war paint of some sort. Only this is a war that is of like a spiritual nature, okay? So because it's a war of a spiritual nature, you need symbolism, okay?
Angeli describes how his outfit is meant to approximate Navajo clothing, but there's another influence at play that he doesn't touch on. Angeli's horned hat also recalls our contemporary images of Vikings, the Nordic seafaring raiders active in Western Europe toward the end of the early Middle Ages.
Now, not all cohorts focused on the insurrection, of course. Grace East, Matt Martello, and Dana Omarova chose instead to reflect on loss and grief. They each wrote and recorded a short story about their lived experiences, followed by panel-style discussions about each one. Here's Grace.
The humble starfish, kingdom Animalia, phylum Echinodermata, class Asteroidea. Sea stars possess the incredible capacity to heal and regenerate their limbs after injury or loss. By considering the starfish, we contemplate experiences of healing and regrowth following rupture, change, and loss. You're listening to the Starfish Podcast, where we tell tales of regeneration. I'm Grace.
I'm Dana.
I'm Matt.
Welcome to the show. When the person you love dies, everything will feel impossible, especially the fact that they are gone. You will wonder why no one thought to successfully invent time travel, and sometimes feel angry at astrophysicists for not discovering navigable wormholes. To no one, you will negotiate and ask, couldn't I just jump back a few seconds, a few minutes, a few days? Maybe iron out that small wrinkle in the ribbon of our timeline and avoid this whole misunderstanding? At first, I thought that what I was feeling was absence, the loss of my person, someone I couldn't believe existed in the first place, and then couldn't believe I had actually found. And now, I couldn't believe he was gone. It felt like someone had taken a pair of scissors and cut a perfect hole in the fabric of the universe, a silhouette suddenly erased. I made sense of it by describing what I felt as a void, like carrying around a giant crater that could rival any of the ones on the moon. But why was the void so heavy? And why did I feel like things were spilling over when what I thought I felt was emptiness? I recently came across an interview with sculptor Henry Moore from 1937. Renowned for his massive bronze and stone sculptures of the human form, often full of conspicuous holes and negative space. He addresses this peculiarity and explains that the whole is not, in fact, absence of form, but rather the presence of it. He implores us to consider the whole as a connector, bringing one side to meet the other. Perhaps the void I was feeling was simply a hole instead, formful instead of formless.
All these years later, I'm struck by how powerful these stories continue to be. Listening to them over the last few weeks transported me right back to those moments. It hit me in the gut. It was so incredibly visceral. These students were learning how to find their voices rooted in their scholarship and expertise, but also grounded in their personal experiences. With our encouragement and guidance, they learned to turn their scholarly attention to the things around them in those moments of crisis. They learned that they could tell moving and necessary stories by listening to the people around them, not just to their scholarly network, but to the people in their lives and in their worlds. They learned that we all have stories worth telling. We are all capable of telling those stories in deeply compelling ways. Our institutes kept growing after that. We started offering 2 a year, a winter institute for graduate students and a summer one for faculty, academic staff, library workers, alt-ac, and independent scholars. Andy Mink left the NHC just prior to the Winter 23 Institute, and Meredith Graham, a recent musicology PhD from Duke, took its place. We became fast friends and collaborators, and under her vision, we made the institutes more inclusive and accessible. She helped support my growing tech team and introduced new processes to make back-end workflows smoother for her team at the NHC, a team that had largely been invisible to me in the past. With her help, I was able to give credit where credit is due and publicly acknowledge all of the NHC's invisible labor in winter 2024. I continued building out the curriculum, adding optional sessions on pedagogy and podcast publishing, and created space for my colleague Patrick to do deeper dive in soundscaping with participants who wanted to level up. I experimented with my own teaching, applying emergent strategy to my pedagogy. I started slowing it down, making it more iterative from tech workshop to tech workshop. I stopped trying to cover everything, letting the participants' curiosity, passion, and struggles lead us. I called attention to the expertise each participant brought into the virtual space and publicly celebrated the things I learned from them. It was a really wonderful time. We were emerging as national leaders in podcasting and bringing what we learned in those virtual spaces back to our campus to grow support for podcasting with our own community. We saw Institute participants really push the boundaries in podcasting, experimenting with form, and leaning into play. I'm going to skip the next excerpt in the interest of time, but if there's time during Q&A, maybe I'll be able to play it. The growth of our institutes came at a cost. Our institutes began averaging between 70 and 80 people, far too many for one Zoom. Even with a stellar tech team who managed the Zoom chat and provided personalized tech support, it became nearly impossible to build the kind of community we had in those early virtual institutes. The tech team helped me realize that it was too exhausting to continue embedding myself with some of the cohorts while also facilitating the entire week and serving as the lead instructor. It was a relief to take something off my plate, but I also lost a lot of the personal connections that made the Institute so special. I would only get to know a handful of people in the Zoom. It was disorienting receiving emails from people I barely knew who wanted to thank me for such a transformative, energizing experience. By then, the crises of 2020 and 2021 seemed to have quieted down under Biden's presidency. We had the COVID vaccine. The nation seemed interested in addressing structural and systemic racism. Most of us had returned to campus and perhaps had less hunger for online communities. But in more recent years, we saw different crises arise as war broke out in Ukraine and then Gaza. Closer to home, OpenAI's introduction of ChatGPT in late 2022 was a harbinger of the current debates roiling higher education about the place, if any, of generative AI in teaching, research, and learning. And also in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this next clip, even though it's absolutely one of my favorites. By the summer of 2024, I ran out of steam. I was uncertain that we still needed to run these institutes. Interest in learning to podcast had never been higher, but I began wondering if maybe the moment had passed for these kinds of virtual spaces. There was personnel turnover at the NHC, and I no longer had a strong working relationship with anyone there. We found out that my mother-in-law's cancer was back and the prognosis was bleak. I asked the NHC if we could hit pause and take time to assess the institute before resuming. They supported the pause, but we never revisited the question. We never actually agreed to end the institute, but I think we all knew it had run its course. I initially went through a period of grief and mourning before I came to accept and embrace its ending. All told, I ran 10 week-long institutes, plus a spin-off institute for faculty at the University of California in December of 2021. Over 5 years, I trained more than 600 people across the US and beyond. These participants went on to launch their own podcasts, become podcast producers, and teach their students to podcast. I still hear from many of them. They share their episodes, they reach out with tech questions, occasionally drop me a line to let me know how special that time was, even this many years later. The community we created persists, their stories continue. As I stand in front of you today, we face multiple crises here in this country, around the world, across higher education. I invoke memories of these past crises to gently remind us that we have lived through times of immense crisis when everything seemed to be crumbling and we couldn't see a way out. The stories we created in those times were a lifeline, a way of building connection between human beings who desperately hoped things would get better. In this current moment of crisis, we need to turn once again to storytelling as a tactic of survival, resistance, and hope. We need to find ways as scholars and as humans to create the conditions that allow these stories to breathe life into us. There are many ways to tell these stories, and podcasting is just one of many mechanisms. It's the way we craft these stories that matter. I propose that the kind of storytelling we need right now is rooted in caring, intentional, ethically designed approaches, such as the one we developed in our podcasting institutes. It requires trust and time and kindness and a willingness to fail. It requires community. These podcasting institutes have a lot to teach us about our own capacity in this moment, our capacity to let go of fear, to take chances, to build trust, to continue playing in a moment of even greater urgency than 2020. These institutes were about so much more than podcasting. They were ways of creating safe spaces for students to imagine possibilities outside of the confines of academic and disciplinary expectations. Even when we couldn't physically be together, we created spaces of possibility that felt transformative. It felt like an alternate universe, a sacred bubble that dampened the noise of the world. I dare to think that perhaps the urgency for this kind of storytelling had faded, and with it the need for these types of spaces. But the past year is a stark reminder of how much work still needs to be done. It's a reminder that we need communities of care and solidarity more than ever. As I think about the slew of crises we face, I ask myself, what do we need now to sustain us? Borrowing from Rupa Kavarsam's DH 2025 closing keynote, Digital Humanities for a World Unmade, I ask, what kind of stories can endure in this moment? What kinds of communities are worth building or protecting now? What do we need not to scale, but to survive? In this age of geopolitical, environmental, and technological crises, we can use storytelling, not content creation, as a way to slow things down, to scale things down. It resists late-stage capitalism, the neoliberal university, rising fascism, algorithmic injustice, and the surveillance of everyday life. We don't need more slop. We need better stories, no matter how short-lived, no matter how small the audience. Just as podcasting served as a way to forge human connection throughout the pandemic, so too can it serve as a way to tend to human relationships in this age of AI, a way to wade through the noise to create authentic, imperfect stories that capture the multitudes of human experiences. These podcasts need not, must not become clickbait, monetized, meaningless content in search of mass audiences. We need small, short-lived niche podcasts that are in conversation with communities, that don't care about engagement, the number of downloads, paid endorsements. We don't need AI-generated podcasts. We don't need value-less storytelling. If we're going to survive our current crisis, we need stories that move us to tears, move us to action, move us to keep going. So in closing, I ask each of you, what stories still matter to you? What stories still need to be told? What stories will you tell in this moment? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam. We have about 15 minutes left for today's events for questions. If anyone has a question online, please, you probably can't see me online, but hi. Thank you, Pam. If you have a question online, please let us know. If you have a question in person, please go ahead and raise your hand.
Hi. My name is Zainab. I'm a journalist from Djibouti, and I'm here in the US for the Humboldt Humphrey Fellowship. Thank you so much for your presentation. As a journalist, I feel a little bit frustrated about the concept of podcast because everybody today, even in their bedroom, they open the camera and put the microphone and do a podcast. So I want to learn about the lesson that you got from this long experience and how not to find yourself as any other podcaster, like mainstream podcaster, because for us as a journalist, we have this challenge and this rude competition between journalist and content creator, and the audience is more switching more to the content creator because it's softer, it's lighter, there is no deep thinking, it's not very hard to have this effort and doing cleaning or cooking and listen to them. So according to your thing, which kind of advice you have for us journalists to catch more our audience and to gain this battle against the content creator?
Did folks on the Zoom hear that, or should I repeat summarize the question?
The room usually hits that sound pretty well.
Okay, yeah. So to try to get at the concern about how to do podcasting, especially as a journalist, in competition with content creators who are just sort of spewing out podcasts and also now adding video, and they're entertaining.
Yeah.
And they're seeking large audiences because that's how they make money. And I think that's one of the big distinctions is that, not to overgeneralize, but they tend to be doing it to make money. Journalists might be engaging in podcasting as a livelihood in a different kind of way. You're not trying to get endorsements or get picked up by Spotify or something like that. But how do we make those stories? How do we keep those afloat when we're just flooded and oversaturated? It's a really tricky it's a tricky tension because we need audience, and I'm trying to argue for small scale audience, but recognizing sort of the hustle that a lot of journalists now have to have because of the state of the media and professional journalism, at least in this country, which is to say, we're seeing sort of crumbling of that kind of infrastructure as well. So me saying to you, oh, well, just focus on a small audience is probably not a helpful piece of advice. But I think that what I always do whenever anyone comes to me with an idea is I start by asking why. Why do you want to create this podcast or this digital project? And how does it reflect your personal values? And I think if you can start there and focus on that and use that as a way to develop a concept, and then it might take time to build an audience versus content where it's just like, I'm just spewing it out to do something, to make some money. If we can start with something that's meaningful to us and then find that small community to start, to reach them, and then it can sort of spread like a ripple effect. That might be one way to distinguish ourselves. Now, it's a challenging time in some ways for podcasting because we're seeing like the mass commercialization of it. We're seeing Spotify trying to like edge everyone out. We're seeing YouTube insisting on video content, and not every, podcasting by nature it's an audio file that we just listen to. And so, I have faith that those audio files will persist even with all that other stuff. And it's just a matter of sort of finding the people who will help you sustain it. But if it doesn't start from your values and with a good idea, if it starts by a motivation to churn out content, then I don't think there's any hope for any of us.
Thank you, Pam. We have a question from, did I see a hand in the room? Okay, so we have a question from online.
From Jonathan. What would be your top tips, key aspects, or just advice for someone planning a podcast launch in 2026? If context helps, it'll be focused on lab safety.
Oh, great. Well, I always recommend that folks scale down to start. So if you're imagining, say, a 12-episode season, maybe start with 6. Especially if you're new to audio, it takes a long time to learn how to edit audio. And I'm imagining that person launching this podcast is not the sole thing that they'll be doing. And so you have to figure out how you're going to weigh that with everything else you've got going on professionally and personally. And so I always encourage folks to scale down, start with a simpler idea or a shorter set of episodes or a shorter season. And then it's up to you if you want to try to produce everything and let it drop all at once. Sticking to a rigorous production cycle, especially during a semester, is very challenging. I do not recommend it. And if you're not sure and you can't make the workshop tomorrow, my contact info is there, and I'd be happy to set up a one-on-one Zoom to chat further about your idea. And that goes for everybody, not just the person who asked the question.
I think we have one more question in the room. Yeah.
Hey, I really love how you mentioned, making a podcast meaningful to attract that the audience that you're looking for. Then now with AI, I'm going to ask the inevitable AI question. Yeah, people are making podcasts with AI these days. People are trying to get more people. Promoters are trying to get more people to make podcasts with AI. Some educators are trying to make podcasts with AI as a alternative to, I guess, reading textbooks and having audio education. So what are your thoughts on AI and podcasting?
Circle of trust here. I'm very opposed to it. But I'm also opposed to, sort of ethically opposed to generative AI more broadly for the environmental and labor and copyright implications that it poses for us. It's really, there's sort of different ways that you can use AI to create a podcast. One of the clips we didn't hear was students who actually used ChatGPT right after it launched to start their podcast as a way to explore ChatGPT and tease it and break it apart. So there are plenty of AI features built into editing tools that actually help us edit. What I really am uncomfortable with is the solely AI produced podcasts like Notebook LM. I think you can pump a bunch of literature in and it can produce a 20 or 30 minute podcast. that, according to my colleague, is very good. I have never listened to one, and I don't want to listen to a machine reading to me. If I'm going to listen to a podcast, I want to hear people breathe. I want to hear that there's a human being on the other end. Now, that being said, there are certain benefits to it, especially if students are struggling with reading. If we trust that it is a good summary and we are comfortable using that as a substitute. So personally, no, but I am trying to, whenever the topic of generative AI comes up, I try to step back from my knee-jerk reaction and not just say no, and listen and not judge. So I don't know if that answered your
I'm sorry for such a broad question, but that was very succinct. Thank you.
I just wonder, it's such a great medium, and I'm wondering with different kinds of assignments that one could do in class, have you seen a creative use of it? Assign students to do a podcast that on some problem, and I don't know, I teach philosophy, so I wonder, you might get them to engage some philosophical issue or figure or something, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of different examples of the way that faculty are using it in the classroom. Some do a really short module on podcasting as a way to help students learn how to write in a different kind of way. Some do a semester-long scaffolded project. I'm working with a PhD class in education. They're an incoming cohort of community college professors, and they're doing a coordinated season of podcasting where they meet once a month and they come for the end of their class in the to the DH Center, and they first worked to ideate their podcast and then to script it. They just came in and recorded 2 weeks ago, and then they'll come back for a listening party. And they're all looking at a particular theme that the professor picked out. And they picked, I think they're each doing a chronological approach. So the groups are working on different time periods to look at the growth of community colleges, particularly in California. So we've seen a really broad range. We also see folks, particularly graduate students, doing it tied to their dissertations and master's theses. And then student groups where they come in, they bring in guest speakers to interview after the speaker gives a lecture on campus. So we see that kind of across the board. And what's really interesting is we're seeing podcasting beyond the humanities. We have an engineering class of about 56 students that's podcasting right now. We have a lot of journalism and media studies students doing it. We're really spanning the disciplines right now.
So I want to make sure we continue this conversation, and we do have some questions online that maybe if folks want to stick around online, we can have Pam have a conversation with you, but I want to respect everyone's time. And I first want to say just thank you so much, Pam, for reminding me always of it's the stories and the voices that matter, especially right now. So please join me in thanking Pam.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it could be an option. You could make it. Yeah, they can work it out. Yeah, thanks, Liz. Thank you, Liz. That was great. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Should I like stop sharing and go back?
We have a question online, May, if you wanted to.
Yeah, happy to ask you.
Is Jonathan still around online?
Yes.
Yeah. So Jonathan has asked a question. You might be able to pull it up now.
Yes, the first one. It was someone else that asked the second one.
Oh, awesome. So the second one in there, Pam.
Second.
Let's see.
At the bottom.
It's asking about and I'll read it aloud. So can you say more about the ethical implications of AI? I'm asking as an instructor who works at ASU. Hi. We are supposed to embrace AI. And I saved that for folks that might want to stick around for this conversation. Yeah.
We have also been asked to embrace AI. Our system-wide chancellor bought a massive package with OpenAI at a time when our budgets are being slashed significantly. And we're being told on the one hand, oh, use it to help you with your grading. And also students, if you use it, it's without being authorized, it's plagiarism. So we're struggling on our campus with figuring out a lot of the implications of that. The thing that we're worrying about this year, and I should add that I'm heavily involved in shared governance, so I'm part of the group writing a lot of these policies. We're trying to figure out what place, if any, it would play in faculty reappointment, tenure, and promotion processes, because we're hearing rumors that evaluation committees are using it instead of reading files, and that's, I think, problematic. So ethical AI, and where I am, there are people who will say it's unethical not to teach generative AI because we have to prepare our students for the workforce, and it's all about proliferating the workforce. And I always ask when I hear that, well, show me some studies. And they send me links to studies that are very small samples, very anecdotal, and are not longitudinal. And so anecdotally, what I'm hearing is that, yeah, there might be an industry that decides to go all in AI and then realizes, oh, actually, it doesn't save time, it doesn't save labor, it's garbage, we have to hire people back. So I'm not sure that the argument that it's unethical, like our campus says, like if you don't prepare students for Gen AI, you're not serving them well. I'm concerned about it too because of one, the way that the training data are assembled by scraping the dregs of the internet, the way that the training data are trained by exploiting workers, particularly in the global south, exposing them to harm, and the environmental impact, which is being hotly debated right now, particularly around data centers. So even though some people will say, oh, a prompt in ChatGPT is no more than a bottle of water or a glass of water, which in water scarce environments such as this and San Diego, that's a lot of water. But also the data centers that we need to run these technologies are not just harmful for the environment, but they're being put in really harmful places. And I have a colleague at SDSU, Dustin Edwards, who's from New Mexico, who just had a book come out. I think you can actually buy it now, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but all about this, the ways that it's harming communities, sucking up their water. So, and we hear people on my campus say, oh, well, if you just learn how to be better prompt engineers, ask a question in a very clear way, you won't use as much energy, and it will be more ethical use. My concern, and the concern a lot of librarians that I talk to, is that ethical use and responsible use is rooted in a presumption of use and not in a position of refusal. And I refuse. I'm in a refuser Discord that I never have time to hop into and read. But the idea, like the Association for College and Research Libraries just came out with an AI competencies for library workers that requires use. Like I'm technically AI illiterate and incompetent based on those new standards because I don't use it. Even though I understand it, I read about it, I refuse to use it. To use generative AI, there's no way to fully avoid AI, and that's part of the challenge is we're very sloppy when we say AI, we don't know what we mean. So those are some of my concerns about AI. And who knows where it's going to go.
Yeah, we had you here to talk about podcasting and storytelling, and now we made you talk about AI. Sorry about that.
I brought it up. You can't move in any of these spaces anymore without talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. But thank you for the question. Thank you for bringing it up. Thank you for those that were here today virtually. It's lovely to see you all. Thanks for those that are in the room currently that are going to definitely take cookies home. Sorry for folks that are online that can't take cookies home. We're going to go ahead and end the Zoom, but thanks for joining us, and thank you again, Dr. Lach.